So just a few weeks ago now, Armored Core 6 released, and being the mech fan that I am, who never got the chance to play the old Armored Core games, and this is the first Armored Core from a modern FromSoft, I needed to try and pick this game up, and I'm glad I did. Armored Core 6 is an action RPG that does something a little bit different with the genre that I've been waiting for a while now, and I want to talk about it. Before I go talking about what Armored Core does cool and different with the action RPG, I feel it's important to get a little bit of context and get a better appreciation of why I think it's cool. Now, it might be a little bit on the obvious side, but the action RPG as a genre attempts to keep the fast, expressive nature of action games with the satisfaction of progression systems, customization, and optimization of an RPG. Action games are my favorite single-player genre, as you might have been able to gather from the previous video. Games like Bayonetta, Devil May Cry, and Ninja Gaiden are some of my favorites. I love the fast-paced, frantic combat puzzles that are put forth in front of you, and you have an arsenal of weapons to choose how to most effectively dispatch the challenges put in front of you. Now, it's not that these games don't have progression systems. Each game I just mentioned has you collecting currencies from dead enemies that you can use to spend on new abilities. Progression is just a basic part of game design. It feels good to have your options expanded as you play the game more and get a better understanding of how the game is played. Progression systems in action games, though, are more of a way to smooth out the learning curve of a game and allow players to learn all the possibilities of the game in bite-sized chunks, more so than the actual character doing a bunch more damage and fighting for every little stat. In action games, you're presented with very precise challenges that only get easier because you have become better at the game and your mastery over its systems, and not because you've optimized synergies and grinded levels to get every little bit of damage possible to blow up a boss. This is fun in its own right, don't get me wrong, but this is more in the ballpark of an RPG game. RPGs are all about the zero to hero. Playing the game not only gets you better as a player, but it also gets you better as your player character gets stronger in a noticeable fashion. From your character's base stats and health being bigger numbers, to allowing your character to equip better items that further increase your stats to increase the power of your character, and that new gear can also have powerful effects that synergize with abilities or other gear you have, so your strength in an RPG can be explosive at certain levels. When designing a boss in any game, you don't ever want a boss to feel like it's impossible. You never want to frustrate your players to the point where they drop the game, particularly now in the era of DLC. With an RPG, you have tiny little failsafe of knowing that the player could go back, do another quest or two, and have that increase their odds to beat the boss. In an action game, there's no numbers advantage. If you're stuck, you're stuck. The most you can do is come to the battle with as many healing resources as possible. Then you enter the action RPG, which combines the fast-paced combat puzzles of an action game with the sense of progression, growth, and optimization of an RPG. In these games, sometimes bosses can just explode. Between a growing understanding of the game and the power growth of the player character, it makes it difficult to gauge how difficult a boss should be from both number standpoint and difficulty of attack patterns. FromSoft Souls-like games take a slightly different route to avoid this by making it known to the players that most bosses are going to be incredibly punishing, and the onus is on the player to make sure they are prepared for a beating, whether they want to come to the challenge by being as strong and as geared as possible, or an understanding of the attack patterns and skill enough to execute to overcome the boss. A lot of the times, it'll often require both. Armored Core does the action RPG a little bit differently than most, and it's the whole reason I'm here with this video. Armored Core is an action RPG that leans more into the action side of action RPG than most games do. Most action RPGs I've played lean heavily into the growth and progression parts of an RPG, the level up mechanics and getting new abilities early on, and growing into your character's whole kit. Another way you see lack of emphasis on progression in Armored Core is the lack of fanfare around damage numbers during combat. RPGs have this so you can see the growth of your character over time and seeing bigger damage numbers as you destroy enemies. These systems allow for players to benefit from the extra stats and numbers on their side to overcome bosses earlier on, whereas the customization and optimization elements of an RPG usually happen closer to the end game with an action RPG. Armored Core does the opposite. While there's still some growth early on with the arena battles to get operating system software upgrades, But after that, there's no extra power for you to gain anywhere else. All that's left is for you to optimize your build to the customization of your mech. Even as early as the first major boss, you're considering if you want to run a build that's more durable and uses heavier weapons, or if you want a lighter mech and rely on mobility to get around dangerous mechanics and float at a closer range. Even later on, as you get more weapons and options, you do get more types of, say, an assault rifle. But generally speaking, the newest assault rifle you just got will have a bigger damage stat, but will also likely be heavier too, so you're going to be trading mobility for the more damage. Unlike an RPG where you'll get a sword with +1 stamina early on and +4 stamina and +4 strength sword later on, which makes the old item rendered completely irrelevant. Armored Core leans so much more on the customization and optimization far earlier on than most action RPGs, and I've wanted that in a game for so long. A lot of action RPGs have a lot of fun optimizations you can do, but while you can get close to those cool builds at endgame, a lot of action RPGs have the craziest and most fun optimizations way into the post-game, requiring you to play way past the main story to experience them. And I've always wondered if you could just bring that fun experimentation and optimization forward, and Armored Core does just that. But it's not without its drawbacks. Boss design becomes incredibly important for an action RPG with little to no progression systems. If your bosses are too hard, there's no way for the players to climb over a boss through pure strength of character alone, and you're going to have people extremely frustrated. Case in point, we saw a lot of complaints about the first boss, Balteus. They even have an official starter guide posted on the Steam page, and as of this writing, all the most troublesome bosses have been nerfed as of patch 1.02. Early bosses like Balteus are incredibly important because by the virtue of having some sort of progression system in your action RPG, you're going to have the fewest options early on, leading to less choices and less impactful choices to build variety for players to explore to defeat your boss, and if they still can't beat your boss, they're kind of just shit out of luck. Then, on the opposite side of the coin, for people who are used to action games, if you give them all the tools necessary to customize the way they want to play, you have to be careful that these people just don't completely destroy the mission. I personally enjoy the difficulty of the bosses in this game, but I can definitely understand and sympathize with the people who are struggling with it. I just love action game bosses though. They are very carefully crafted to put your skills to the test, and even if they're a little difficult, knowing that these bosses are designed and planned by other people to push you to your limit just lights a fire inside of me that makes trying the bosses at a certain level of addicting as you try and find new strategies as you get ever closer to your end goal. When considering boss battles in action RPGs though, there's another almost specifically action RPG mechanic that seems to be hotly debated in game design as of late. That mechanic being how designers let players handle stun states. A lot of action RPGs have settled on the mechanic where your opponents have some sort of stamina bar or stagger meter, and when this bar is filled or depleted, they go into this stun state that allows the players to punish. So far so good, and I think this is a good development. Immediately when that bar fills or depletes is when it gets contentious. What do we do when the player achieves this stun state? Some games like Sekiro, Wolong Fallen Dynasty, and Nioh have more of an automatic or guaranteed punish system. What I mean by that is that after depleting their stamina gauge, you walk over to the boss, press a button, and you get X amount of damage. There's no getting any more out of it, it's just flat amount of damage. Other action RPGs like Armored Core, Final Fantasy VII Remake, and Final Fantasy XVI place the importance on the player to make the most of the stun states. Both have their pros and cons. The single button punish style makes it so that as a designer you know that even for your worst of players, it only takes X number of stun states to defeat your boss, and you can then adjust your boss's mechanics and timings to be the set difficulty you want. When you have the players dictate the damage for the stun states, you then have to account for the difficulty of the boss based on players who grasp how to deal tons of damage during these stun states, and those who just want to mash some buttons during the stun states. With the difference in damage output potential between these two types of players, you have to account for how many times the average player is going to interact with your boss mechanics in a normal state and how much longer a person has the chance to make mistakes. During this though, the players who are least capable of capitalizing on these punish states are also those who are going to have to interact with your boss in its normal state more as well, causing a negative feedback loop for players who aren't as great, which is never a good thing. That being said, in my humble opinion, the increased challenge on the designer to find a sweet spot for difficulty for the player while using a freeform punish state is so worth it to me. That feeling the player has when the boss goes down and your mind starts racing at the possibilities and the anticipation of getting the absolute cathartic release of hitting your most damaging buttons, man, nothing is greater in gaming. FS7 Remake does this amazingly because when a boss goes down, you've got 3 whole characters you can switch between, all ready to unleash an ass beating during this window of opportunity, and you have Tifa who can increase how much of an ass beating the boss takes during this time, and it just feels so good. Again, here in Armored Core, getting a boss in the stun state and just hitting them with a fully charged melee weapon or just absolutely unloading everything you have during a boss's stun state just feels so good and is the perfect break in tension for a tense boss fight. Also, if your game has any sort of element of mastery executing some combo you've been practicing during this stun state, gets you the extra dopamine release of performing something you've been practicing over time. Alright, as we come to the close to my discussion of Armored Core, we need to talk about the Chapter 4 end boss. The Chapter 4 end boss was insanely difficult and puts the whole thought experiment of the game to the test in my opinion. This boss epitomizes Armored Core 6's need to customize and optimize before the endgame, and this boss makes the pros and cons of freeform stun states very apparent. And before I talk about my personal experience with this boss, I want to point out that over the course of this video, I've made a much more concerted effort to use clips that are relevant to this points I'm discussing. But for this boss, I've decided deliberately not to include footage of me killing this boss. I genuinely think that the fun and intentional part about this game is analyzing your mistakes and downsides of your current build and customizing it to fill in the gaps based on the way you've been playing, and nothing forces you to do that quite like this boss. I felt so strongly about this play pattern that I didn't want to watch videos on YouTube about particularly strong builds in my first playthrough because I felt like the customization of your own play was the design intent behind the game. If you want to try and play the same build as your favorite streamer or YouTuber, that's great. Nothing wrong with that. You do you. I just thought that playing this boss blind from start to finish and how you learn and customize your gameplay until you achieve victory was a very intentional experience, and I wanted to at least keep that opportunity alive for my viewers. Anyways, for my first attempt, when I was trying to kill this boss, I kept running out of ammo about 3/4 of the way through the fight. The next build I tried, I was prepared and waiting to do tons of damage during the stun states to try and minimize the number of normal states I played through, but this build really struggled at getting it to the stun state, with reload times taking too long and letting the boss's stagger meter reset. Then I had a few attempts that were great at getting the boss to the stun state, but then ran out of gas to actually deal damage during the opening, forcing me to play through the normal state more than I would have liked, and I kept making too many mistakes, which led to my downfall. My final build was fast enough to stay safe through the normal states, had enough tools to peck at the boss and keep a steady pace on the stagger meter, and finally do a ton of damage during stun states to close out the fight as quickly as possible. The way this fight and game in general is played, everything you experience as a player feels very intentional, and I appreciate that in a game. Defeating the Chapter 4 boss led to a sense of satisfaction that I haven't felt in a while from a game. There are a few challenging fights left in the game after this one, but nothing felt as difficult as it feels like FromSoft wants the player to experience the pull of the closing moments of the story. This game isn't going to be everyone's favorite. It makes very deliberate decisions to craft an experience that's different from a lot of games out there. For me, this game knocks it out of the park, and I'm looking forward to finding the secret parts in future playthroughs and maybe even trying the PvP at some point. And that pretty much wraps it all up. Thanks for watching. This kind of analysis of a game and breaking down what I find fun or not fun in a game is the kind of videos I want to focus on in this channel. You can go just about anywhere for a normal review, but what gets me going is analyzing and trying to find an understanding of what makes games fun. I love games like Armored Core that have a slightly different take on traditional genres and broaden our understanding of what makes good games. The next video I'm going to be doing is showing off a little bit of something I've been working on through my classes, and after that it will begin my very large, very long deep dive into card games and fighting games and what makes them similar, different, and where they're going in the future. Thanks for watching, and stay toasty.